hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, thank you everybody for your attention today, and thanks so much to everybody over at Maui Mauka for inviting us. It's really exciting for us to be a part of this training this time around. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So does everything look good out there? Look good? Okay.
It's on my end, it's a little, it looks like a little like difficult to read. It's blurry.
Oh, is that?
It looks great on my screen. So,
Okay, yeah.
So maybe it's just me.
Hopefully that'll clear up. But yeah, if anything else happens unusual, yeah, let me know. Okay, so yeah, my name is Jenny, and I'm the Operations GIS Specialist here at the Maui Nui Seabird Recovery Project. We are a project of the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit of University of Hawaii in association with Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and Pacific Rim Conservation. MNSRP was established in 2006 in response to the discovery of a large breeding colony of the endangered Hawaiian petrel on Lanai. And our mission is working to locate, protect, and enhance seabird populations of Maui Nui. So these days, that means a lot of different things. We're involved in several different projects, and I just kind of put together a collage here showing some of those. Up in the upper left, we're banding uaukani, or the wedge-tail shearwater, on Molokini. And then next to that, we're deploying automated acoustic song meters onto Kaho'olawe. And in the bottom left, we're monitoring the uau, or Hawaiian petrel burrows on Haleakala. And finally, that's observing some boobies on an offshore islet off of Paualu Point near Kainai. So we do a variety of different things, which makes it really exciting and really fun to be a part of this work. But before I get into a lot of the details, I wanted to start by talking about what are seabirds. So seabirds spend the majority of their time at sea, returning to land only to breed. They feed at sea, and they can even sleep while on the wing. So they have extensive feeding ranges that cover vast areas of open ocean, and they are a top marine predator. So just to give an example, looking at some of the tracking data have shown that some of Hawaii's seabirds travel all the way up to Alaska, and this can be on a single foraging trip. So these data were collected in partnership with USGS in 2006, where we tagged uau to collect satellite locations. And as you can see, they are quite capable of these long distance trips. Okay, so back to the characteristics here. Seabirds are all very phylopatric, meaning that they return to their native colony to breed, and breeding seabirds will return even to the same nest or burrow where they have been established. They are also long-lived with a low reproductive rate, so they usually produce a single chick every year. So in biological terms, we refer to this as a K-selected species, as opposed to an R-selected species, which produce multiples of offspring, most of which are not expected to survive. So this means that seabirds invest a lot of resource into chick survival. So these two characteristics, the long lifespan and then also this high phylopatry, make seabirds ideal subjects for long-term studies, as well as good indicators of general ocean and ecosystem health. Okay, so finally, seabirds have a diverse nest site selection. So I've kind of shown this here in these three pictures along the bottom. These are three Maui species, the uaukani here on the left in a seaside burrow. This is a burrow of an uau up on Haleakala, and finally the or red-footed booby sitting on its nest in the treetops. So I'll talk about these species and this behavior in more detail in a bit. There are also important morphological characteristics of seabirds. On this moli here, the Laysan albatross, you can clearly see its webbed feet. So all seabirds have webbed feet. And procelariform seabirds, which includes the petrels and the shearwaters and the like, all have these tube noses. So what it is elevated or enlarged nares here that house sensitive olfactory organs and also the glands that expel salt. And seabirds also have a typical coloration. It's combinations of whites and blacks and grays and browns. And actually, they are not sexually dimorphic, so they don't vary in their coloration or their patterns between males and females. Okay, around Maui, you may notice birds at the ocean, but that are not actually seabirds. These are shorebirds or wading birds. They have relatively long legs and often longer bills that they will use to pick things out of the sand or substrate when they're feeding. And they do not have webbed feet, so they have very obvious toes, like you can see on the egret here. They can fly over the ocean, and they do so when migrating, and some of them actually migrate very far distances, but they live and feed on land, so they're not seabirds. On Maui, they are found on the seashore and in the wetlands, and in the case of like the kolea here, they can be found across the islands. Okay, so next I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about some of the important roles of seabirds. They are especially critical to island ecosystems. They deposit nutrients from the sea onto the land. So this diagram shows how nitrogen products and actually also phosphorus influence the land and the nearshore ecosystems when introduced through seabird guano. So you can see here in the diagram, there's this direct deposition and the direct impact of entering the terrestrial ecosystem through the guano, and then indirectly from the runoff, it can enter and influence the nearshore coral reef ecosystem as well. And recent estimates say that there are 3.8 million metric tons of nitrogen that are pulled out of the oceans and deposited onto the land by seabirds every year through this guano deposition. So this contribution to the nutrient cycle is not insignificant, and in fact, without it, island landscapes would have a near impossible time supporting any vegetation. So some Hawaiian plants, like the ohia, have evolved to colonize bare lava rock. However, the nutrients and even the seeds from seabirds really help form the start of these plant communities that we recognize on our islands. Okay, seabirds also have a very important role to play in ocean ecosystems. They are a key player in pelagic trophic webs, and as is true of all trophic systems, each piece helps maintain an equilibrium across all of the levels. So seabirds are top predators, and their common prey are squid, myctophids or lanternfish, and then small schooling fish, unfortunately, normally grouped all as bait fish. And they often descend, the seabirds often descend in huge numbers on these bait balls. And this behavior has been used by fisher people throughout time and across the globe as indicator of the large predator fish that are the target fish of the fishermen. So, and actually, I found this article on the internet by Marlin Magazine talking about how to use birds during fishing tournaments in order to score the big catch. Okay, so narrowing the focus to Hawaii, we have 23 resident seabird species. Many are located in Papahanaumokuakea, or the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and atolls, which is actually the largest tropical seabird rookery in the world. 11 of the species nest in Maui Nui, shown, and I show them here in these top boxes. We have the boobies, so here the red-footed booby and the brown booby. Also, the masked booby has been known to nest on Maui, even though I don't show it here. And all of the boobies are called because of their calls. Next, we have the noyo, or the black noddy. The noyo are commonly seen feeding along the coast. You can see them from the beach, but especially from offshore, you can see them from the boat as well. They nest in the rocky cliffs. Next are the shearwaters and the petrels. The Bulwer's petrel here and the Van Rum storm petrel, they're small and they are rarely encountered. But the Newell's shearwater, the Hawaiian petrel, and the wedge-tailed shearwater are more conspicuous. And I'll go into more detail about all of these guys a little later. Very recognizable and often seen soaring near and over the water are the tropic birds. So the Kauai ula here with the red streamer and the Kauai kea with the white streamer. They will nest on cliff faces. So the 5 species along the bottom here may be seen visiting Maui Nui, but they don't nest here. So we got the sooty tern and probably one of the most distinguishable birds, the Eva, the great frigate bird, which we can see soaring overhead very commonly. They're around, but they don't nest. The same with the bone-in petrel, which we can see, and sometimes even the albatross, the kaupo, the blackfoot, and the moli. However, this may change soon. Molokai Land Trust have set up social attraction for the moli at the Mokio Reserve on Molokai. So maybe pretty soon we will be moving the moli up to the top boxes here as they establish themselves in Maui Nui. Okay, so where can we find colonies of seabirds in Maui Nui? They are found across many diverse habitats among the islands. So on the map here, all of these purple diamonds are wedge-tailed shearwaters. So they're along the coast and then on offshore islets. Also the noyo in the green diamonds, they're along the coasts, and the boobies here in the red. And then the Newell's shearwater and the Hawaiian petrels, you'll notice, are at the higher elevations, restricted to these mountaintop locations. Okay, so this table just shows some details about our shearwater and petrel species. The uaukani are by far the most numerous, with almost 300,000 breeding pairs. They breed throughout the archipelago, so northwestern Hawaiian Islands all the way down through Maui. They burrow in different coastal habitats like dunes and native coastal strand, and also in rocky offshore islets. The a'o and the ua'u are the endangered seabird species. And these estimates here, the 5,000 breeding pairs, there's a little bit of error included in those estimates as they utilize also at-sea survey counts, which are a little less reliable. But in Hawaii, they're found on Kauai, Maui, and in Hawaii Islands. And they will be on mountain slopes, so anywhere from mid to high elevation, wet forests, to also up to the dry alpine areas. And finally, our more mysterious species, the oak, or the Bulwer's petrel. They're mainly on islets and atolls, and they will nest in rocky crevices. And the ake, which are also endangered with very low numbers on the islands, are found on Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii, and they're usually in higher elevation areas as well. So, going into a little more detail about our more commonly encountered species, I'm going to start with the ua'u, or the Hawaiian petrel. So in these pictures up here, we have an adult and a newly fledged chick. So when the chicks fledge, they are the same size as the adult. Sometimes if they've been fed very well, they're even a little bit heavier. This picture does a good job of showing a typical coloration. So you have the darker grays and blacks on the back and then the white ventral side. And you can see this bird in flight here, this recognizable white underside. They also have feet, and we call it dipped in ink. So they have pink feet, but the toes are black. You can see that here and even in this guy in flight a little bit. The breeding season for the ua'u is February through October, so the chicks are fledging now. We've already got a couple down birds so far this season. The largest colony of ua'u is located on Haleakala. So we monitor part of that colony on the leeward slopes. So specifically in the Nakula Natural Area Reserve and Kahikinui Forest Reserve. So that's shown here on this map. The Haleakala crater is here. So on the leeward slope in the green is Nakula, and then next door Kahikinui. So the majority of the population of Oahu is located within the crater and is managed by Haleakala National Park. And we use the same types of methods when we do our management on the leeward slope. So we check game cameras for burrow activity. We watch for and we trap for predators like cats, rats, and mongooses. And we do an annual vegetation survey as well. So an example. Here's just an example of some of the game camera footage that we will watch for. So we watch the adults as they return throughout the season to brood the chicks and feed the chicks, and then eventually they'll stop feeding them every so often, and the chicks will start to come out and stretch their wings and exercise, and then eventually we get to see them fledge. And we have seen the number of burrows and the fledging success rate increase over the years. So it suggests that these management activities like that we practice and then also in Haleakala National Park have really been having a positive impact on this population. So when we started monitoring these burrows in 2012, there were 4. And since that time, we have, this year, our count is up over 80. Another very important part of this that I didn't mention is that these areas are fenced to keep out the ungulate, the grazers, so the goats and the pigs. And so this is really when we started seeing the increase within Nakula and Kahikinui is when that fencing was completed. Oops. Let's get away. Sorry, guys. Okay. So the a'o, or the Newell shearwater, are found in largest numbers actually on Kauai, but we manage a small population in the West Maui Mountains. So the a'o also have this black and white coloration. You can see here the white ventral side and the dark along the back, and their feet are all entirely pink. The predator-proof exclosures at Makamaku'ole were constructed as mitigation for the Kahiava wind turbine facility. So they have these decoys you can see here on the bottom to attract the birds. They also have a playback system that plays colony sounds in the evening times. And they have these artificial burrow boxes, and you can see here the entrance to the nest burrow here. So there are 2 exclosures, and they have 50 burrows each. The intention is to attract both ua'u and a'o, but to date only the a'o have established. And so the hope was that by establishing these colonies, it would make up for any take that happened as a result of the wind turbines that were constructed. Okay. Unlike the a'o or the ua'u kani have a global distribution. And they are easily recognizable on land and at sea. They have this kind of all over gray coloration, and they do have a wider breast, but they're more gray. They have entirely pink feet, and you can see here the band very clearly on this one as part of our work that we do with them, and I'll talk about that in a second. Let's see. As I mentioned earlier, they burrow in coastal habitats, and this picture is a beautiful example of restored dunes at the Mo'omomi Preserve. And here we are, this would be our chick banding at Mo'omomi, so probably in October, sometime very similar to where we are now in the season. The ua'u usually fledge at the end of October, so coming up very shortly. I also included this video of adult banding at Havea. Included this because ua'u are often heard rather than seen because they have a very distinctive call. So. So if you're out at, like at Camp 3 or something like that in the evening times, you may have overheard their chatter within the colony. It's a little hard to see because we ban the adults actually in the evening when they return to the burrows after feeding out at sea during the day. We regularly monitor the Uaukani at 5 colonies shown here. So Mo'omomi, Molokai, Havea in West Maui up at Kapalua, Okipa on the North Shore, Kemaole 3 in Kihei, and Molokini Islet. The yellow dots indicate colonies that are active, but where we don't do banding. And the pink locations here are areas where Uaukani have historically bred, but and they could reestablish with predator control and other management. So at the managed colonies, we track reproductive success at a sample of the burrows, and we do that every year. We remove predators and restore habitat, and we also do banding and recapturing of birds for population studies, and we've done this for a few decades. So our activities result in pretty good responses from the colonies. So for example, at Kemaole 3, this graph shows the number of chicks that we have banded over the years. And you notice this huge drop. In 2017, we actually only found 1 chick within the colony. The rest had been decimated due to predation. So we started a predator control program, removing cats and mongooses and rats from the colony. And the following season, we got over 40 chicks. But then we noticed also that there was this buildup of invasive grasses in the colony that was harboring predators. So after we removed all those grasses, we saw another huge jump in the number of chicks, up to over 100. So this really shows that the colony management leads to greater reproductive success for this species. And also, this really helps, having these long-term studies. These data really help understand population trends, which is really important, especially now as things are changing so quickly in terms of climate and environment. Okay. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the red-footed boobies, which were discovered breeding at Paualu Point out near Ke'anai in January of 2018. And this was very exciting because this was the first breeding record for this species on Maui. And seabird colony formation is a very rare phenomenon, especially these birds showed up and they were already breeding birds. So it's a very unique event. We monitor the colony throughout the year and we track the growth. So unlike the other species that I was just talking about, the boobies, the red-footed boobies are more asynchronous in their breeding, and they stay at the colony year-round. We track the growth using drone imagery. So we fly the drone over, we take this is a composite image of the entire peninsula, and then we can zoom in on these areas where we know the boobies are, and then we can use a grid and do these cell counts. And every time, all these little white dots in the treetops are boobies, and so every time we count a boobie, we estimate that it's representative of a breeding pair, because this would be during the time when they are likely on either eggs or chicks on the nest. So when we started, the first year we did it in 2019, we had over 450 nest or breeding pairs, and it's been growing since then. Okay. So I'm just going to finish up today by addressing threats to seabirds and strategies to address those threats. So even if a particular seabird species is not endangered, like say the Uaukani or the they are still at risk, because there is a global decline of seabird populations. This graph shows counts of monitored seabird populations all over the world. And since 1950, the total numbers of these populations have dropped by 70%. So seabirds are particularly vulnerable because they face threats both on land and at sea. On land, they are victims to habitat loss, mainly through human development, also light pollution and invasive predators. So in many places where seabirds evolved, like islands, mammals and other land-based predators did not exist. so they are not equipped to handle that threat. And at sea, they suffer from plastic ingestion, competition with humans through overfishing, and bycatch. So a recent estimate is that over 600,000 seabirds die annually as a result of being caught as bycatch. So this could be in longline fisheries or trawling, etc. And of course, climate change exacerbates all of these threats to some degree, but probably most significantly through sea level rise and habitat loss, and impacts to the food stock through warming oceans, which impacts the trophic structure. So yeah, just a note on sea level rise and habitat loss, they estimate that in only 80 years, if there's 2 meters of sea level rise, much of the land in the Papahānaumokuākea will be lost to the rising sea level, which that's a lot of seabirds that will be displaced. Okay, so there are choices that we can make to reduce threats to seabirds and threats to overall biodiversity. So one, if you eat seafood, investigate the source. So only buy seafood from sustainable, regulated fisheries. And one good place you can check out is seafoodwatch.org, although I know there's several out there. Yeah, and just always ask where the seafood is coming from. Two, reduce the use of all plastics. Just stop buying it. And actually, by following number one here, you can also help reduce plastic, as most ocean plastic is fishing trash. So together, these two choices can really help protect seabirds at sea. Three, keep pets indoors or on a leash. Cats have a staggering impact on many bird species worldwide, and dogs too can indiscriminately kill birds in a colony while running free. And four, do not feed or support feral animal colonies. So especially on islands, invasive feral animals wreak havoc and cause irreversible imbalances to ecosystems. And trap, neuter, and release programs do not solve the feral cat colony problem. So eliminating the threat of predation can protect birds on land. And five, use dark sky friendly lighting. So directed down lights, or I'm sorry, to do dark sky friendly lighting practices, follow these principles. You direct your lights down or shield them, use them only when you need them, and use longer wavelength or warmer lights. And all of these guidelines can be found on darksky.org, which is the International Dark Sky Association website. This will help reduce light trespass and protect wildlife, and that includes sea turtles here on Maui. So these are just some examples. These lights are pointing up and all out and all over the place, and by directing the light downward and where it's needed, you can change problem lights into solution lights. Finally, support conservation agencies and their efforts. We work to identify and protect critical habitats. We assess open space, we propose protective strategies. We also lobby for important issues and actively mitigate threats, including addressing lighting at the city and county levels, and training resorts and other businesses on safe lighting practices. And we educate communities at all levels about the environment and about our roles as individuals within it. And finally, just taking a more localized view of some of these solutions, there are specific actions we can take here on Maui. First of all, with the lights, just turn them off and close the blinds. This is something that applies to locals, but also can be shared with our visitors. This is a view of Maui from Haleakala, and in fact, you can even see Oahu out there in the distance. This big glow out there. And even though we don't have as much infrastructure as Oahu, here on Maui, you can see how our lighting is still a big problem, how much light pollution is still produced from our lights. So for seabirds, the problems arise because the light energy or light energy in general is directly involved biochemically in their navigation systems. And also they may instinctively cue to light at night, as much of their prey is bioluminescent. So, but for whatever the reason, our lights distract them, and they may just land inland, or they can circle overhead until they are exhausted and they fall to the ground. So this phenomenon is termed fallout. So another thing you can do is watch for downed birds. Often they can be found on resort grounds, in parking lots, or under streetlights. But they will also search out burrows since that's their behavior. So sometimes it is a game of hide and seek. So you can see the little tail feathers of this one sticking out there. At this point, after the birds have hit the ground, the timing is really crucial because this is when they're most at danger of being either predated or hit by a car. So we really try to advocate keeping an eye out for birds and letting us know. Any bird, adults and chicks included, are vulnerable to light distraction, but fledgling uau and uaukani chicks turn up in large numbers in October and November, so starting now. So keep an eye out and help us pick up chicks. And this is, if you do find a bird, you can use gloves or a towel and very carefully place it in a ventilated box. It is critical that it's safe from predators. You don't have to give it any kind of food or water, but then you give us a call at our hotline, which is 808-573-BIRD. We can also get out, we have these info cards, you can print them from our website, or we can get them to you, or if anybody wants to distribute these around or pass on this information. Once we get the call on the hotline, we'll come pick up the bird, assess it for good health, and we'll release it, or we'll either release it or send it to rehabilitation if it's needed. But the majority of birds are banded and released back out to sea. And I can't stress enough how important this effort is, because birds that are recovered as fallout, they do return to the breeding colonies. So our history of banding data strongly supports this, that these birds can return for several years after being located and recovered as fallout. And it's not only the uaukani shown here. Anytime you see a seabird or a bird in need of help, you can always call our hotline and we can do what we can to help. So with that, I just put the email, or I mean the webpage on there, but I'm sure also our contact information can be shared up on the thing. And thanks everyone for listening, and I'll take questions. Stop, share. Yeah. So I have one question about the Hawaii seabirds that don't nest here on Maui Nui. Is there evidence that some used to nest here but were extirpated? And actually, that's a good question. A lot of them, there is a lot of evidence of seabirds nesting in locations where they're not nesting anymore on the island. So for example, the uau used to not only be restricted to high elevations, they used to have a much more extensive range on the island. But in terms of species that aren't located here, I can't really think, because it seems like, as you move down the island chain, they're actually newer islands, right? So in terms of the island evolution, they haven't been here quite as long. And so that's one thing to think about when we think about the buoys moving here. It's like, are they moving down and progressing and finding new territory as things become crowded up in the older established zones? But in terms of if there's anything was pretty significant here but not anymore, I don't think so.
Jenny, there's also a question on Facebook about, I don't know if you can answer this, but was the Kaho'olawe fire early enough this year to not affect nesting?
Oh, actually the only seabird, the seabird colony on Kaho'olawe is on the offshore islets. There's too many cats on Kaho'olawe, so for seabird colonies to persist on the main island there. So there are uaukani on the islets, but none on the main part of the island. So they wouldn't have had any impact. So the fire wouldn't have had any impact on the seabirds. And are there volunteer opportunities at Maui Nui? Yes, and same answer as Laura. We love having volunteers, and we do normally have a lot of help. We do restoration at the colonies, and we do banding, which is always a very It's an awesome event that when we involve the community and any other volunteers that want to participate, but unfortunately this year we're restricted from having the volunteers. So hopefully next April will be our next big colony, like community-wide colony banding event. And there's a question about feral cat colonies, and there's disagreement between the bird conservation organizations and Maui Humane Society, and is there any dialogue happening or chance that are alignment of ideas of how to handle the problem? The divide on perspectives is confusing to the larger community, and I agree. And I know I'm not personally involved in a lot of the discussions that have taken place, but I know there is active, earlier this year there was some active lobbying going on, and other, what do you call, like, where they were having discussions and call for proposals and things like that. But it is at an impasse, I believe, because there are such strong opinions on either side. And I think the more people talk about it, hopefully the more people will get involved with ideas, sort of new ideas that will keep people from thinking that it's just the same old solutions that aren't going to work. I know, on Lanai, they have the cat sanctuary, which has gone a really long way in taking the cats off the landscape and putting them somewhere where it's healthier for the cats, but then also healthier for the environment. So talks like that would please everybody all the way around would be most successful. So hopefully, as long as we just keep the discussion going, I'm optimistic, but we'll see.
Thank you, Jenny. That was awesome. Thanks for being our guest speaker today, and thanks everybody for taking the time to be here and all the really great questions. And we'll do a follow-up email, and you guys can have, you guys will have all of our contact information if you have any follow-up questions. Allison, do we want to do the polls? Let's see, I think I can do it now. So this is your follow-up assessment. It's similar questions as what you had earlier, just to gauge how much you guys learned. It helps us in terms of developing future trainings and such. So we'll let you guys take a couple minutes to do that. Everyone's seeing the polling? Oh yeah. Probably takes a few minutes to do.
Hey Laura, someone asked where the polling is. Can you guys type in the chat window if you can see the polling?
Got 2 people so far in.
Okay. So April, it might be on a different screen, like somewhere else, kind of hidden, maybe behind our Zoom or something.
We can also send it just in case in our follow-up email too. Okay, we have about half the people in. Is there anyone still working on the poll? There's one more short one. Sorry, they only allow us to have 10 questions at a time, but take your time with that. You guys can also notice that there's just a couple of things to consider with, helping to take care of, Maui and Hawaii. And I think all of us have kind of mentioned these points throughout our training today. We're preventing and reporting invasive species, rapid ohia death awareness, decreasing plastic use, looking at different ways to reduce your ecological footprints, and making sure that you're taking care of the aina from Mauka to Makai. We've talked about reducing mosquito habitat, taking care of our pets to prevent them from killing wildlife. And this is a lot to remember, and there are a lot of really great resources out there. Our MauiMauka.org has volunteer opportunities listed on it. It has different resources and links online to look at all this information. So check out MauiMauka.org/resources. And each one of our organizations has different websites. We've talked about volunteer opportunities, and I know it's kind of difficult right now with COVID, but there are some organizations, I can think off the top of my head, like the Coral Reef Alliance, that are, having people grow plants for them at their homes. So there's different remote opportunities right now. And events are kind of on hold, or they're being held virtually. There's still the Malama Wauakua art show exhibit up at the Huinoeau that you can see, and Maui Nui Botanical Gardens is doing the Arbor Day. It's a little different this year. You have to sign up for your plant beforehand, but it's still a good way to get information about native plants and be able to plant a native plant in your backyard. So there's definitely a lot of great opportunities, and we hope that you guys learned a lot today, and that you can share what you've learned and continue learning and experiencing the native environment of Hawaii. So, and unfortunately, I guess there are some black boxes on my screen. I don't know why, because, but, oh, Zoom and technology. So, but anyways, that's the end of our training, and it looks like we've got most of the people in with the polling, and thank you everybody for your patience and for participating today. And we'll send up some follow-up emails as well.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all coming in today and hanging out for 3 hours. So just a reminder, if you guys want that certificate, go ahead and just email it. You can even reply to the follow-up email we do.
All right, cool. That polling was cool.
Yeah. All right.
And then we'll stop recording.